Mentioning New York is to evoke the thick neon nights of Times Square that never go dark, a sign that the city never sleeps, where the American dream shines through every street. The smell of hot pretzels and the cry of "hot dog here" mingle with the rhythmic breath of warmth from subway cars hurtling beneath the ground. Skyscrapers rise into the sky like modern pyramids, reflecting the golden glow of streetlights and the glittering night sky studded with ambulance sirens. Central Park is a deep green umbrella amid the concrete sea, where the rustle of leaves underfoot and the damp earth scent of the park stir a rare moment of quiet. On Wall Street, the clicks of electronic buttons and the cheers of the financial market compose a symphony of dollars and ambition. Every step on 7th Avenue echoes a promise of opportunity and prosperity. On the sidewalks, tourists rush to point their cameras at colossal billboards, while locals glide by like ghosts through the flow of people. New York is the sweetness of an early morning donut, the wafting coffee smoke over the bread display, the relentless heartbeat of a city born to keep rising. But just a few blocks away from those dazzling avenues, the wind whipping against sleeping bags and the smell of smoldering embers from makeshift fires in the cold early hours paint a completely different reality. The Bowery, East Harlem, South Bronx, where hundreds of tents and battered pushcarts crowd beneath overpasses. This is not the backdrop of a Hollywood night scene, but New York's version of Skid Row, an invisible community severed from the spotlight. At Grand Central and Union Square, provisional homes built of cardboard and thin blankets shelter nearly 5,000 people forced to sleep outdoors in the bone-cutting cold of winter 2025. How can a metropolis allow itself to shine so brightly that it stages lavish fashion weeks and erects 100-story towers, yet leave tens of thousands of people huddled in public parks? And the bigger question, are we living in a society where just a small slip, a medical bill, a job loss, a storm, is enough to turn anyone into a person without a home? The Bowery and East Harlem panorama, a darkness in the heart of the city's light, just a few subway stops from Times Square, the glittering entertainment heart pulsing neon 24/7, lies the damp, night-fogged Bowery, where reality shatters amid the dazzling night markets. While you're still drunk on tourist cheers, inhaling the smell of pretzels and hearing "hot dog here" echoing, a few steps to the left and darkness swallows people curled inside faded sleeping bags. Under the awnings of old buildings with ornate glass windows, hundreds lie motionless like solitary statues, arms clutching bottles with the last glistening drops, hoping to trade that for a little warmth. The smell of mildew drifts in with the cold wind, mingling with the smoky trace of the newspaper they burn, seeping into every alley of the city. Moving from Bowery into East Harlem, the space seems transformed, yet the contrast only sharpens. You'll hear optimistic children's laughter from newly built apartment blocks, mingling with the sinuous salsa rhythms spilling from corner bars. The music sounds like a declaration. New York is a place of endless joy. Yet just a few turns away from that dance, an old, battered cart is piled with torn nylon bags, threadbare wool blankets, and dented tin cans. The pale yellow light casts onto cracked sidewalks, marking the bruised soles of unhoused feet. They awaken the space with sighs and whispered prayers, while the scenery around them remains ceaselessly bustling. Worse still, just following 7th Avenue to Union Square, you can pause to savor a fine glass of red wine at a luxury steakhouse. The clink of glasses resonates like congratulations for the city's countless achievements. Yet only a few steps away, beneath an overpass, the image of a trembling elderly man burning a newspaper into a small fire to keep warm will choke you. The fire crackles softly. The smell of burning paper mingles with white breath exhaled, composing a heartbreaking melody within the opulent urban symphony. When you look at the numbers, that picture becomes even more exposed. In 2025, according to the New York City Department of Homeless Services (DHS), over 90,000 people experience homelessness each year, of whom approximately 3,500 sleep outdoors every night, surviving in snow-covered parks, on icy subway benches, or under wind-whipped overpasses. Alarmingly, 40% of them are women and children, the most vulnerable group, with their numbers climbing each winter. Communities of color bear the burden disproportionately, with homelessness rates 6 times higher than those of white people. Every day, emergency lines ring with more than 1,000 distress calls, reminding us that with each passing minute, someone is in need of a thin blanket and temporary shelter. Beneath the glamour of skyscrapers, invisible walls still divide New York. Shelters, mandatory temporary housing, are often located on cheap land outside high-value real estate areas, confining unhoused people to a few aging boroughs. Private security and police in wealthy central districts are ready to push them into back alleys without any formal eviction orders. Public parks, their last refuge, are locked each night, stripping away their only option. It is the very subway tracks, highways, zoning policies, and not in my backyard fears that have turned a prosperous city into a ruthless network of traps for those who stumble. Amid the glaring patches of light, Bowery and East Harlem stand as haunting reminders. New York is not only the vibrant rhythm of the streets, but also the fragile breaths at society's margins. When you cross that boundary, listen to the city's sighs, feel the cold of forgotten policy, and look directly into the eyes yearning for a blanket, a meal, and the recognition of being human. Because only when no one is left behind does New York truly deserve the title, the city that never sleeps, for human warmth will always outshine any light. Human stories behind every face is a life. Walk along busy stations like 125th Street, Penn Station, or around Tompkins Square Park, and you'll encounter countless tired eyes, vacant stares cast somewhere amid the fast pace. By day, they quietly line up at free meal stations. By night, they curl up in sleeping bags beside the tracks. But don't be quick to write them off as society's outcasts. According to the Coalition for the Homeless, over 50% of homeless people once had stable jobs, fixed housing, and paid taxes regularly. They were nurses, teachers, chefs, or engineers, contributing to the sustenance of this city. A small shock is enough to send those who once stood firm tumbling. In an expensive city like New York, a sudden emergency medical bill of tens of thousands of dollars, an unexpected job loss, or a tearful divorce can erase everything. When a storm from the ocean rips off a roof, or when a financial storm hits in the aftermath of a pandemic, there is no buffer for those without health insurance, without family, or simply without enough luck. They get swept into the grind of living costs, and in a moment, from the warm threshold of home, they find themselves pushed out into the wind-swept streets. The pain of material loss is not the whole story. Many carry invisible wounds that are hard to reach. Among the more than 95,000 people who cycle through homelessness each year, at least a third bear the marks of serious mental illness, PTSD from war, bipolar disorder, or undiagnosed and untreated schizophrenia. As the public health system closed psychiatric hospitals and cut support funding, they were pushed onto the streets with no medication or medical supervision. Sometimes fentanyl, heroin, or cannabis becomes the cheapest, most accessible medicine, not out of a craving for euphoria, but because the reality is too painful to endure. That is when the portrait of a human being fractures into pieces. They may have once taken souvenir photos with tourists on 7th Avenue. They may have once mastered numbers on a computer screen on Wall Street. They may have once taught children to read in a public school. But now, among shanties and silence on a subway platform, they yearn for one warm place, one full meal, and one gaze that acknowledges, I am not a number, I am a human being. Every homeless face is a story woven from hope, loss, and the desire to be reborn. When we pause to listen, it is not just the sound of cold wind or the whisper of burning newspaper we hear. It is how we begin to see the fragility of dreams and recognize that with just a slight slip, any one of us could find ourselves in this world. The history of a crack. Where did New York go wrong? New York did not become a land of promise by accident. Beneath the gleam lie cracks stretching back centuries. In the late 19th century, when waves of immigration from Ireland, Italy, and Eastern Europe surged through Ellis Island, the city exploded in population and industry. For poor immigrants, the Bowery and Lower East Side were the first ground they set foot on. Tenement buildings squeezed together like honeycombs, each room only a few square meters yet housing up to 10 people. No clean water, no sanitation, no natural light. People pressed into one another amid the smell of mildew, the sharp wails of crying children, and smoke from makeshift stoves. At that time, New York had no public housing policy, allowing poverty and disease to spread across generations like a wound left unstitched. But that wound never healed. By the 1930s, the Great Depression erupted, throwing millions of workers out of jobs and homes. Central Park, a symbol of green respite, was transformed into Hoovervilles, hundreds of crude shacks made of wood and rags erected among the trees. Cold rain and wind pierced the thin tarps, while authorities dismissed it as a temporary phenomenon and deployed relief through New Deal programs insufficient to erase systemic inequality. Communities of color and undocumented immigrants remain marginalized, despite hunger and sprawling shanties testifying to a forgotten social justice. After World War II, as America began rebuilding cities, urban renewal policies were launched with the promise of revitalizing downtowns. Entire neighborhoods in the Bronx, Harlem, and Lower East Side were razed to make way for towers and commercial centers, forcing poor residents to migrate to the suburbs. The modern urban landscape rose on broken foundations, yet alongside it, the system of redlining, barring communities of color from mortgage access in desirable areas, revealed that racial discrimination was embedded deep within policy, turning subway lines into invisible borders between the wealthy and the poor. By the 1980s, under Reagan, New York witnessed Reaganomics slashing public housing budgets by 70% and shuttering numerous public psychiatric hospitals. Thousands of mentally ill individuals, an integral part of the homeless population, were pushed onto the streets with no treatment, turning places like Port Authority, Penn Station, and Tompkins Square Park into makeshift refuges. In just one decade, the city lost over 100,000 affordable housing units while those eking out a living on the street surged, creating convergence points that sketched the extreme paradox of wealth and poverty. Entering the 21st century, gentrification spread as investors flooded into Williamsburg, Harlem, and Lower Manhattan. Rents skyrocketed. Longtime locals were displaced because they could no longer afford housing. Affordable units vanished rapidly, replaced by gleaming penthouses and luxury lofts, while shelters, still playing the role of temporary band-aids, failed to address root causes. Despite Callahan v. Carey 1979 legally obliging the city to maintain emergency shelters, public housing construction budgets accounted for less than 1% of total spending. Shelters thus became like field hospitals: triage, then closure, sending homeless people back into the cold wind and darkness of night. Looking back from cramped tenements, dilapidated Hoovervilles, to modern gentrification, one realizes that homelessness is not a random consequence. It is the residue of rushed immigration policy, segregation of residence zones, funding cuts, and an unprincipled housing market. To close this historical crack, New York needs more than temporary shelters. It needs a long-term vision to build sustainable, equitable, and humane housing, places anyone can truly call home, not just makeshift shacks under overpasses. The support system: why so little and so late? When New York declared a right to housing after the Callahan v. Carey ruling in 1979, many believed it would be a turning point, a door of hope opened for those without homes. Yet reality has shown that right to be a promise on paper. The shelter system is suffocatingly overloaded, with an average of over 80,000 people housed each night in 2024, the highest number in the city's history. The city spends more than $4 billion annually just to operate that network, yet virtually nothing is allocated to true reintegration programs, helping unhoused individuals regain employment, stable housing, or mental recovery. Budget pressure has turned shelters into places of triage rather than healing. They lack social workers, mental health professionals, and pro bono legal advocates to defend people trapped in the cycle. The result: some remain lost inside the shelter system for 5 to 10 years, their lives delayed because they cannot find a way out. Many call NYC shelters not temporary homes, but soft prisons. Cramped rooms, bunk beds pressed together, virtually no personal space. Some have reported harassment, single mothers targeted, transgender individuals pushed away. The absence of accompanying support services, therapy, career guidance, addiction recovery, turns shelters from refuge into psychological traps, anchoring people in place behind invisible walls of fear and despair. Amid that storm, nonprofits like Coalition for the Homeless, Breaking Ground, the Bowery Mission, and Project Renewal have struggled to be lifelines, distributing thousands of meals daily, deploying mobile medical teams, building transitional housing, and offering mental health and employment support. But their efforts remain fragile under unstable funding. Every cut in federal or state dollars forces them to scale back. Areas like South Bronx, East Harlem, and parts of Queens often fall into support blind spots, leaving many homeless residents with virtually no reliable foothold. The most painful gap is the mental health piece. Over 35% of homeless individuals in NYC suffer from serious mental illness. NYC Health 2023. Yet the public psychiatric infrastructure has shrunk from about 90 facilities in the 1970s to fewer than 10 today. Hospital admission standards are draconian. People must prove they are an imminent danger to themselves or others, pushing many into prolonged street wandering until it's too late. In the face of adversity, employment programs like Jobs Plus, Work Progress Program, and Chrysalis NYC struggle to teach skills, help with resumes, and prep for interviews, but more than 60% of homeless people are ineligible to participate. They lack identification, bank accounts, or a fixed mailing address to receive offers. Even if they overcome those barriers, New York's labor market has few entry-level positions that pay a living wage, making the economic piece of recovery almost impossible. Ultimately, it is the fragmentation of the support system that poses the greatest barrier. Housing, healthcare, addiction services, education, and legal aid are each managed by separate agencies that do not share data, forcing those seeking help to tell their story again and again each time they apply. With no central coordination point, people get lost in a labyrinth of bureaucracy. Many give up the moment they enter a shelter. New York, the city that never sleeps, is still awake with a hard question. Why, despite enormous resources, do we offer the homeless scattered, patched, perpetually delayed assistance? Without a unified, long-term, humane system, every shelter and every program remains a temporary band-aid, incapable of truly sealing the deep, historical cracks. Economic crisis and housing costs, the roots turning workers into homeless. New York is supposed to symbolize aspiration and opportunity, yet just beneath the mirrored glow of neon lies a persistent economic crisis where workers pay with their own homes. When people speak of the city that never sleeps, few realize that at a $16 minimum wage, working 40 hours a week brings in only about $2,560 before taxes, not nearly enough to cover rent, food, healthcare, or save for emergencies. In Manhattan, the global heart where finance and entertainment converge, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment has climbed to $4,150 per month. Cross the Brooklyn Bridge into the borough of Brooklyn, and the number dips slightly but still sits around $3,200, while even the poorest borough, the Bronx, sees average rents near $2,400. With housing costs consuming 80 to 100% of income, any financial shock, a surprise medical bill, sudden job loss, or storm damage can strip away what felt like a firmly rooted home. Simply put, New York leaves no room for error. A small slip can turn a factory worker, teacher, or delivery person into someone without a roof. The shortage of affordable housing pushes the dream of home ownership farther out of reach. According to the Department of Housing Preservation and Development (HPD), New York is short more than 500,000 units renting for under $1,200 a month, levels affordable to low-income earners. While the city is pledged to build 300,000 affordable housing units over the next decade, many of those projects are labeled market rate, without clear price caps for constrained incomes. Tax incentives for developers further skew priorities toward profit over the real needs of struggling residents. On top of that, not in my backyard resistance to shelters and public housing blankets neighborhoods like the Upper West Side, Forest Hills, and Park Slope. Wealthy residents, worried about safety, property values, and school quality, fiercely oppose new approvals. Shelter approvals drag on for 4 to 6 years. Many proposals are scrapped under public pressure, while tens of thousands remain waiting for a safe place to sleep at night. Pressure intensified from 2023 to 2025 as the Federal Reserve persistently raised interest rates to rein in post-COVID inflation. The result? Many homeowners faced foreclosures, losing properties to banks and being pushed onto the streets. Landlords, squeezed by higher borrowing costs, raised rents to compensate, forcing tenants out or deeper into debt. Service industries, restaurants, and retail, employers of many working-class people, also saw waves of layoffs, while unemployment benefits proved too short-lived for workers to find stable replacements. The most tragic detail: as of 2024, some 70% of people experiencing homelessness still carry time cards, working part-time in cafes, stocking warehouses, or delivering through the night. They keep striving, holding on to jobs, yet their narrow wages cannot cover rent. At dawn, under the pale streetlight glow, they pack meager belongings and leave shelters, stepping into the crowded streets, silently hoping for a miracle that will keep their bed and their lives from being swept away in a vast city. The story of housing costs and economic crisis in New York isn't just dry statistics. It's the image of workers fighting every day for stability, for a real home. When the free market bets wrong, policies fail to prioritize equity, and the dream of shelter is torn apart by financial pressure, the city's shine only makes its social cracks more visible. Only when New York recognizes that a home is not merely an asset but a basic human right will faith in the future truly begin to be rebuilt. Social perception and media, the biases holding back solutions. New York, the city of dazzling lights and relentless noise, is also a place where entrenched prejudices and distorted information cling to unhoused lives, blocking any meaningful effort to resolve this crisis. From luxury neighborhoods on the Upper East Side to narrow alleys in South Bronx, public opinion often echoes the same simple but misleading refrain. They chose this life. Jobs are easy to find, yet they still want to sleep on the sidewalk. Even in boutique cafes, latte-sipping customers might mutter that homeless people are just lazy, addicted, or seeking attention on the pavement. But that accusation never sees the full picture. Nearly one-third of homeless people in NYC are children or caregivers. More than half are working part-time or earning irregular income, and many carry untreated mental health wounds. This isn't a path they chose. It's one the abandoned system pushed them into. Media and social platforms amplify those biases. Images of addicts collapsed on the street or scuffles in subway cars quickly become viral clips, conditioning viewers to remember only violence, crime, and fear. Major outlets sometimes paint with too broad a brush, focusing on sensational headlines while rarely producing in-depth investigations into the economic roots, policy failures, or human stories behind the crisis. Audiences, conditioned by 15-second social media interactions, easily conflate homeless with dangerous and undeserving. The result? Affluent communities mobilize en masse to block shelter proposals, demanding police clean up the streets instead of supporting long-term solutions. It gets worse. Politicians on both sides of the Hudson seize every opportunity to weaponize homelessness for campaign rhetoric. One side shouts for tougher security, sweeps of drug addicts and troublemakers, while the other promises more temporary housing, without presenting credible funding plans. Policies shift with terms, leaving homeless individuals as ongoing test subjects, failing, then abandoned until the next public outcry arises. They lack voting power, voices in the discourse, and therefore are never prioritized in conversations about the city's future. Amid the cacophony of blame, humane coverage is rare but powerful. Stories surface. A nurse who sacrificed during the height of a health crisis now homeless because of crushing medical bills. A single father displaced by automation, wandering train stations with his young child. A veteran who defended the country, but, unable to escape the nightmare of PTSD, becomes a sunless figure on a curb. When told, these stories soften readers. They reveal not personal failure, but the victims of a failed support system. Only when public perception shifts does collective action gain traction. If we stop blaming individuals, stop treating shelters as threats, and begin seeing homeless people as contributors worthy of care, society will find the will to rebuild support mechanisms, from genuinely affordable public housing and mental health services to sustainable job training. The human-centered revolution starts with how we look at them, not as lazy, but as the nurse who once saved lives, not as societal scum, but as the single dad doing his best for his child, not as useless, but as the veteran battling unseen demons. When shared awareness internalizes collective responsibility, New York will stop leaving lives on the margins. Then each shelter becomes a springboard for recovery. Each story is not just newsroom content, but a reminder. We can choose willful blindness, or we can face the truth and act. At a time when this great city has weathered countless historical upheavals, healing its social wounds is equally urgent, ensuring that anyone, regardless of their past, has the right to dream of a real home. New York isn't short on money or housing. The city is short on the right priorities, so those whose lives derailed aren't forgotten amid the rush. Tens of thousands living on the streets aren't there by choice. The system let them fall through the safety net, from short-sighted housing policy to invisible social stigma. We can keep looking away, closing our eyes to the eyes longing for shelter, or we can stare the truth down and start changing how we treat each other through every word, every small action, and by collectively pushing for humane, lasting solutions. If you believe no one deserves to live on the streets, share this video. Don't forget to subscribe to keep following real stories from the streets.